Hey, Jack, this is Chad from Ohio, and I've been interested in your talks about anarchy, and I'd like to know your opinion about how we would deal with radical groups like ISIS and terrorism in an anarchy society. Thanks for all you do, and I'm looking forward to your answer.
Okay, this is a common thing. In this case, it's ISIS, right? Or another country that wants to go to war with us, or how would we provide schools, or how would we make sure the poor are fed, or whatever. And this is a common thing that people ask when they start to objectively and honestly examine the concept of anarchy from a moral standpoint. It's not that they're totally opposed to it at this point, because there are the people that are like, my roads, where did I get my roads? We never have. Okay, yes, we can't build a flat thing, I know, and people like that get very upset when you kind of basically just go, I can't deal with you. You're programmed, and the reality is, a person that's in that state, you can't have the conversation with them yet. A person that's in this state where they're like, well, fine, but how would we? And it's a legitimate question. Then you can have the conversation. But I think that many people that are either anarchists or basically like anarcho-libertarian, there should be a tiny little bit of state left behind, right? Who, by the way, I have great respect for and great relationships with people that are libertarians, and I think our goals are the same, and I think it'll make sense as to why that's the case if we look at it this way. The problem that people have when they look at adopting an anarchist philosophy is they are thinking way too short term. So it's as though we would throw a switch. They're thinking like election cycle timelines. Well, Ask Clown A didn't work out, and Ask Clown B that's running for office seems a lot like A, so Ask Clown C is the best choice, so we'll just make a change, and then it'll change, and then it doesn't change. But you at least have the illusion of that and the illusion of control. So they're thinking in these shorter time cycles, daily, monthly, annually, maybe out a decade at the most. This is seventh generational thinking. This is an evolution toward a philosophy of self-governance. So let's look at it from a completely different standpoint. Imagine that we go back in time over 100 years now, I think it is. Orville and Wilbur Wright have just completed the first mechanized flight. And you say, you know what we should do? We should attempt to build a flying machine that will go to the moon. And everybody says, you can't do it, it'll never work. How would we get out of the atmosphere? How would we keep people alive? How would we get enough energy to break the atmosphere? How would we, how would we pay for it? And just, we shouldn't even bother to go past where Wilbur and Orville went with this little plane at Kitty Hawk. We should just be happy that we have that and just stop right there. Or we can actually imagine if we had said that back then, right? If in 1903, which I think is when they did that, right? If in 1903 people went, do you know what? If we can do this, then we can do that. Do you think we might have got there quicker? Because then it would have been, here's a goal, let's start working on it. And in reality, we did, because people were able to conceive of, okay, this only went a little bit, but if we can make something that goes a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and then technology takes over in an evolution, and it's not that many years later, 1927, the song Oysters and Pearls springs to mind. Lindbergh left Long Island in 1927, thumbed his nose at gravity, and climbed up to the heavens, right? Okay? So that was not that far between the time that Lindbergh flew from America to Europe across the ocean alone. And that all started with this thing that was this little bitty thing that probably a lot of people thought was just a novelty and not that important, or the automobile, right? So Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile, but he invented the process of making the automobile affordable for all. And look what we have today to choose from in cars and trucks and vehicles as a whole. And this is the natural evolution of technology. Well, if technology evolves that way, it only evolves that way because we evolve that way. So on some levels, we should be looking for technological replacements for government. And how will we deal with ISIS? Well, you know what? How will we get through the radiation belt without frying everybody that's in the space capsule on the way to the moon? You know what? Until we get to the point where we're ready to skin that cat, let's not worry about that. Let's find out all these other things, and we will, by necessity, by need, by evolution, learn to deal with these things along the way. And we can start peeling away layers of government, which is what libertarians want to do. And this is what I've always said. Libertarians and anarchists should have no conflict. Fake anarchists that are actually communists, sure, but they don't count because they're not real anarchists, okay? So, to get to that point, you can't throw a switch and have it work. If you threw a switch and just did away with the state right now, the media version of anarchy that would result in the rise of a police state like nothing you've ever seen before. It would create the absolute opposite effect of what you would want as a peaceful, peace-loving anarchist or libertarian. You would get the exact opposite. You get the thing everybody's afraid of. Well, anarchists are not stupid people, okay? We understand this. Libertarians are not stupid people. We understand this. But what's frustrating when you're trying to explain the way of thinking is that everybody wants to jump to the end game and say, well, how would we when we haven't even gotten started yet? Because imagine if somebody said 10 years ago, we should create a currency that can be used all over the world, that can replace government monopoly currencies. It should be more secure than government currencies. It should be designed to increase in value over time rather than decrease. It should be completely decentralized. No one should be able to manipulate it or control it. People should be able to use it in any country. People should be able to exchange it publicly or privately. And you should be able to do business with a friend or a giant company with this type of currency, and it should write government out of the equation. How many how would we's would we have gotten to that suggestion? I reckon thousands and thousands. The government won't let you. It's illegal. It violates legal tender. By the way, the government can't stop you. It's not illegal, and it doesn't violate legal tender laws at all. Okay? Just doesn't. So, now, the government wanted to stop it, sure, but the solution was complete decentralization. Who will you go after? We got Silk Road, took their Bitcoin. Okay? That's not Bitcoin. It reminds me of my father, who used to tell me the internet was going to go broke. And I'd say, Dad, the internet is not a company. And finally it came out what he was saying. He thought AOL was going to go broke. He thought AOL was the internet. And that's the problem, I think, with a lot of people looking at anarchy. You're looking at the existing apparatus of the state rather than the path to removal of that state. It's a path. It's a long path. So how might we deal with ISIS? Well, let's start out with the fact, whether you like to hear this or not, that without our government intervening in other nations and supplying arms to people they should have never given arms to, ISIS would be no threat because it wouldn't exist. We've literally created ISIS. And that's not conspiracy theory. There's enough documented facts to show that the United States created ISIS. So now, so that we're not shirking and just saying, ISIS, right? So that we're not playing the game that people do with Morodes as anarchists, let's say that we did have a well-organized, large group with lots of resources bent on our destruction. How would we deal with that? On some levels, we don't know exactly what our solution would look like. But mutual defense is something that human beings have been doing for a very long time. So it stands to reason that within an anarcho-nation, okay, you would have defense forces and you would have defense technologies. And people think that, like, that's not what anarchy would have. People say, I had a conversation with somebody on Facebook yesterday. It says, an anarchist is anyone that rebels against all authority and rules. And authority and rules are what keeps us in line. Okay, so you don't know what anarchy is. Anarchy is not the absence of rules, but the absence of rulers. What anarchy is about is that you and I have voluntary associations. And if you're doing things that I'm not about that, I can go find some other group to voluntarily associate with, and you can't use coercion to keep me there. That's really, in a nutshell, what it is. It's the belief that to take anybody's property, freedom, or liberty without their consent through the use of force and violence is wrong. Period. To make anyone participate in something they do not wish to participate in when they're not harming anybody is wrong. So what we have to start from is, does that make moral sense? Do you take all of the what ifs and just put them on the shelf for 10 minutes and just ask yourself, does that make moral sense? And if the answer to you is yes, but I don't understand how, let the F go for a minute. Just let it go. Because I don't understand how we're going to make a device that people can carry in their pocket that has more computing power than the computer banks NASA used to put a guy on the moon. Doesn't mean it can't be done, right? We have to actually start with the desire to actually get it done for it to happen. So if we can actually all look at it and say, you know what? In a perfect world, because this is the one I love, in a perfect world, anarchy makes total sense. If there weren't bad people and bad governments and everybody was willing to do their share and pull their weight, this would be the best way to live in the world, but it won't work because that's not how people are. Great. We agree then. We completely agree right up to that's not the way people are. Okay? I believe that's not the way some people are, and I believe it's exactly the way the majority of people are if they're not being controlled by a tyrant. But we're also programmed to behave in inhuman ways now, and we have to start reversing that. So what we agree upon is this would be the ideal. This would be, if we could do it, perfection. If you could create a society where no one had their property taken from them against their will, where no one was incarcerated or attacked or had violence used against them unless they were harming somebody else, and no one could be coerced to be part of something they didn't want to be part of, and yet we could have all of the services that we need to have a good life, that would be ideal. Okay, if that makes sense, then why don't we try to get there? Why don't we try to get there? Why don't we look for every place where we can replace something that right now we think only the government and state can do, and nullify it, eliminate it, remove it, and strip it down? Now, here's where the libertarian and the anarchist have their disagreement. There's a point of the strip down process where the libertarian says, well, when we get there, we should stop. Here's how I feel about that. Our great, 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 great grandchildren, God willing, can figure that out when they get there. Because you, me, and the horse you rode in on ain't going to see that happen. We are not going to have to worry about dealing with an organization like ISIS in a stateless society in our lifetime. We are at Kitty Hawk. We're trying to get Limburg to Paris. Our seventh generation down grandkids can put the rocket on Mars. And if we start looking at it that way, we stop having all of these but, and we turn to what can we do now without them? Because that leads to action versus debate. Because action is making something like Bitcoin. Action is organizing your community to replace government services now, whatever you can. And until we can start thinking that way, and until anarchists are willing to start explaining it that way, anarchy will remain a very tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of a splinter. I would reckon that less than 1/4% of people in America today identify as anarchists. And of that group, there's a whole bunch of them that are nothing but communists in disguise. Now, let me be clear. In an anarchy, you can have all the communism you want. You can have all the socialism you want. You can have all the capitalism you want. You can have all the fill in the blank you want. So long as you do not coerce others into participating in it with you. The minute you do that, you've gone from anarchist to statist. So when people say, well, we have to have the people control the means of production or whatever. No, people should control the means of production that they have the ability to control, that they can gain through voluntary cooperation with each other, and they should be able to run that however the hell they want. As long as I don't have to participate, good on you. But if you're going to make me participate, now you're a state. Now you're using violence and coercion. Now you're not an anarchist. So what do we do as modern anarchists? We accept the interactive edge with the state. We accept our place in history. And we begin to deconstruct the state by replacing it, by rendering it irrelevant. And we take a big problem like how would we fight a global war and say, you know what? If we can actually make this work, there'll be a hell of a lot less of those to fight in the first place. Because people don't go to war. People don't go to war. Governments go to war, and then they send people to fight them. And that's reality. States declare war and take warlike actions upon other states, and then take their subjects, which are supposed to be citizens, and send them to die and to kill others. So maybe if this philosophy could grow globally over time, there'd be a lot less of that conflict. And here's the point to drive home. There's been times in history when men have killed other men for the control of salt and pepper. Okay? There have been wars fought for the control of salt reserves and pepper and many other things. Today we fight over oil. More accurately, energy. When's the last time you saw a war over salt or pepper? And the answer is never. You'll probably have to go look up the fact that there were wars over salt and pepper to believe me. Some of you won't believe that there were, but you can go look it up and you'll find out there were. So why not? Why are there no wars over salt and pepper today? Is it hard to get salt? Is it hard to get pepper? Is it expensive? Is it rare? Do you have to go out and mortgage a kidney to get a couple pounds of salt? No, it's cheap, available, and abundant. We fight wars over scarcities. We fight war over scarcity. The more abundance you create, then the less there is to fight for. When people can acquire what they want through work, they generally will do it. When you create factions and layers and caste systems within societies and tell people you don't have enough because they do, and we should take it from them and give it to you, both of those people want to fight. And whether it's over who ships oil where or how much of your paycheck you get to keep, all that changes is the scale of the battle and the amount of violence. So how would we handle ISIS with anarchy? I think long term, 200 years out, we could pretty much mitigate concepts like an ISIS to irrelevancy. And the small pieces that would be left would be easily put down through mutual defense contracts and mutual defense agreements from multiple groups who just want to be left alone to do their own shit. And the one thing that none of them will tolerate is someone taking that away. That's how I think we would handle it.